Hello everybody and welcome to this week's Motor Trade Radio podcast powered by eBay Motors Group. It is Saturday the 10th of December and you're joined by myself, Philip Nothard.
And me, Curtis Hutchinson. This is episode 66, season 8 of Motor Trade Radio, bringing you all the chatter that matters. Once again, we've gathered together this week's big car retailing stories across the franchised and independent sectors for you to enjoy all in one place, on demand, on your podcast feed.
So we've got a few little shout outs this week, but we are joined again this week by Stephen Whitton for his latest Men Able moment. So do stay tuned for that at the halfway break there and listen to the guru of all things well-being and mental health with his latest update.
Yeah, definitely. And also a shout out for the Barbara Cox Woman of the Year Award, which we announced was last week, has now been launched. So deadline for nominations close on the 30th of January, and the winner will be announced on International Women's Day on the 8th of March. So just head over to the website, which is womenwithdrive.co.uk, and nominate the person you would like to win that.
And as always, if you haven't signed up to the Motor Trade Radio free newsletter, and yes, I did say free, that has all the URLs and links to the headlines that we'll be talking about this week, then please do head over to the Motor Trade Radio page on LinkedIn, and you'll be able to pick up the newsletter from there, or just check the feeds from either Curtis or myself, and again we'll be sharing that every Monday with a link to the recording plus a link to all the headlines for that week.
And also, if you'd like to get in touch with us, come on the show or send us a press release, then you can email us at motortraderadio@yahoo.com. You can also join the Motor Trade Radio LinkedIn and Facebook groups or follow us on Twitter.
So headlines this week, Curtis, where are we going?
Okay, where are we going? That's a very good question. It's all very thematic this week, you'll be pleased to know, Phil. So headlines from AM, Car Dealer, Motor Trader and the Financial Times. We'll take a look at November new and used trends, so new car and van registrations from the SMMT, and also a look at used car pricing, stocking and selling trends from eBay Motor Group. We also have a news update. It's really the final piece in the jigsaw of Who's Buying Helston Group, which we've been reporting on for, well, certainly last week, and we've mentioned a couple of times over the last month or so. So we've got the final piece in that particular jigsaw. And finally this week, why EVs are likely to get even more expensive from 2024.
So, as you say there, Curtis, we've got a busy week this week in terms of the headlines. So, we're heading over to the AM Online, which has reported on the SMMT November results and reports UK's fourth month of new car registration growth. Now, it's interesting with this one because obviously the fuel type and what's happening in that market, but also, the shift now in the month of November for a little bit of uptake in the fleet sector, aren't there?
Yeah, and the figures kind of leap off the page, don't they? Because November saw year-on-year registrations up by 23.5%. Now, there is a bit of a backstory to this, isn't there? Because last year, November 2021, registrations grew slightly, but the previous year, 2020, they were down by 27%. So that 23.5% rise for this November is welcome, and it is kind of setting the market back to almost where it was pre-pandemic. So that takes year-on-year registrations to 3.4% down year on year. So we've just gone over the 1.5 million unit mark now.
Yeah, and as you say, the significant increase there, but we're still marginally behind those pre-pandemic figures there, but private up 2.7% to 64,200. Fleet up 45.4%, business up 112.2%. And interestingly, across some of the European markets, because I like to talk about Europe a little bit, Curtis, but Germany up 31.4% year on year, but down still behind the pre-pandemic of 2019 by 12.9%. France up 9.8% year on year and down 22.4% on 2019. Italy up 14.8% year on year, but down 20.6% versus 2019. And Spain up 10.2% year on year, but still down 21.4% pre-pandemic levels. So great results in terms of those increases, not just for the UK, but straight across Europe in terms of year on year compared to, the year 21, but still lagging behind in sort of double digits there behind the pre-pandemic figures.
Yeah, and certainly within the UK figures, the SMMT was quick to point out the success of plug-ins. So plug-in vehicles accounted for 28% of new registrations. So that was just shy of 40,000 units. As fully electric vehicles, so BEVs, took a 20.5% share, which is actually the largest monthly share of the new market this year. And interestingly, PHEVs registrations down 6%, making up 7% of the market, while hybrids actually rose 67% to 11.3%. So some interesting dynamics there around PHEVs.
Yeah, just starting to pan out a little bit now, isn't it, in that marketplace. But clearly, the movement away from the petrol and diesel is clearly seen now, isn't it, in the new vehicle share.
Yep. And shall I tell you what the best-selling car of the month was?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, you can do. Yeah, go on.
I suspect you
We,
already
we
know,
won't,
but
we
it was.
won't talk about where those vehicles possibly have gone, but yeah,
Yeah, well, that's another story, isn't it? So the best-selling car of the month was the Nissan Qashqai, which is now pretty much on track to become the best-selling car of the year. Well, actually, when I say best-selling, we should really say best registered car of the year. So in the month of November, it registered 5,636 units. So year to date, it's on 39,000 units. Sunderland built Nissan Qashqai is, as I say, set to be
finding
the best
homes.
seller of the year. Yeah,
Yeah,
finding homes. Yeah.
finding homes. That's the one. So we've also got the latest on the LCV, the van market, haven't we? And Motor Trader have covered that, saying the van market very difficult, but growth forecast for 2023 there. And this is where Mike Hawes is sort of noting some of the challenges faced at the minute in terms of that LCV sector, but is still expecting some growth in 2023.
Yeah, so the market down 22% in November. So that's the lowest recorded for the month since 2013. And it's 14% below the pre-pandemic 5-year average that the SMMT quotes every month. So the story goes on to say that despite strong order books throughout 2022, the performance has continued to be hindered by those persistent supply chain issues, which have restricted production globally and limited availability. So registrations down by 20% in the year to date, and that's at 260,000 units. But there is some glimmer of hope here, because the SMMT is quoted elsewhere in the story saying that it expects registrations to grow by just under 14% in 2023, with battery electric vehicle volumes expected to rise by a whopping 61%, and that will actually take a 9% market share.
Yeah, and I think clearly from both those stories, we are starting to see, activity now. We've got product coming into the marketplace, maybe not across all manufacturers, but clearly there is a little bit of sort of product now coming into the sector, in there, which hopefully we'll see what that turns out to be like in 2023.
Yeah, definitely. So, next headline is from Car Dealer, and it is used car prices rose in November despite signs of seasonal slowdown. eBay Motors Group finds. So, this is the monthly market view from eBay Motors, and it found the average advertised price of used cars rose 2% to £17,610 over the course of November, while days to sell and dealer stock saw marginal increases as the seasonal easing of demand came into play. So, just starting off by looking at some of the pricing trends there. So, month on month, the prices rose for the fourth month in a row, and that was driven mostly by cars aged under 2 years, which increased in value by 3% to £35,425. And that's actually a year on year rise of 19%. So car supermarkets and franchise dealers actually saw the biggest rises overall, up 2% and 1.5% respectively. And year on year comparisons show prices across motors.co.uk dipped by just 1%. So that's very much a welcome sign of that ongoing stability, as November 2021 was 16% up on November 2020, when the average was just over £15,000.
And in terms of stock volumes, and it's reported across the sector at the minute that some of the dealers are just holding back from stocking too heavily as we sort of head towards the end of the year and thinking about what will happen in the first quarter of next year. But it's reported in the report by eBay Motors Group that the average stock, as Curtis has said there, for the month of November is 52.2. That is a 2.4% increase overall month on month since October of this year, and a slight decline on the same point last year by 7.1%. Now, in terms of channel, car supermarkets averaging 393 units in November this year. That's up from 352 units in the same month of in terms of October this year, sorry, but significantly behind last year's November figure of 503 units. So clearly, it's supermarkets that have driven that year on year drop in overall volume, because franchise dealers 72 on average compared to 71 last month, and slightly down on last year figure of 83 units. And independent dealers fairly flat, really. So 37 units this year on average compared to the same figure last month, but up slightly compared to 35 units on average from last year. So clearly, it's the car supermarkets that have driven that 7.1% decline year on year of average stock levels.
And turning to days to sell, which is the third criteria that eBay Motors Group uses to measure monthly performance. So they increased marginally, actually, just 1 day month on month to 39 days compared to 37 days November last year. The fastest sales were achieved by car supermarkets, averaging 29 days, and franchise dealers at 32 days, with independents averaging 48 days. And looking at some of the fastest sellers, the fastest seller for the month was actually an EV, the Volkswagen e-Up, spending just 10.5 days on dealer forecourts, followed by the Ford Galaxy at 11 days and Vauxhall Mokka at 14 days. So interesting to note that of the top 10, EVs and hybrids actually made up 4 of the month's top 10 fastest sellers.
And as always, we'd always urge you to go to the website, and you might even get the link on your newsletter to the location of the report on the eBay Motors website there. But there's a lot more detail than what Curtis and I have just given you a brief overview of. So, a lot of detail in this report by model, fuel type, age profiles, mileage profiles, supply, demand, etc. So we would urge anybody that wants a sort of a view of what's happening broadly in the marketplace, then do head over to eBay Motors Group for more detail on this report.
You're listening to All the Chatter That Matters on Motor Trade Radio, powered by eBay Motors Group. This is your weekly one-stop shop for all the biggest car retailing headlines from across the media, available on demand wherever you are on your podcast feed. Next up is Stephen Whitten with his latest Menable moment. And this week's theme is Heal the Boy and the Man Will Show Up.
Yeah, hi guys. Thanks for having me back for another Menable Moments. Hope you're well. Wow, we are rapidly now properly in the Christmas season. And I know last time, Phil, you mentioned that it was a bit premature of me to talk about Christmas lights because I think it was still the back end of November. But we're rapidly moving the other way now. So it definitely is okay, I guess, to talk about Christmas lights, which is why I'm not going to. That made sense, didn't it? Anyway, we are now heavily in the Christmas season, the season for love and understanding. And with that in mind, firstly, want to just ask you to just continue to stand shoulder to shoulder with your friends and peers and colleagues and family, because for many people, this is an extremely stressful time of year. All of the things that you're worried and anxious about can come together at the same time, whether that's money, the lack of daylight, health, the weather, and it's a whole bunch of things. And I've got to say, for me, Christmas has always brought up quite unpleasant memories of childhood, to be honest, and I'm not going to dwell on that, but what I am going to say is there's a fabulous phrase that I've learnt recently. I think it's a Tony Robbins phrase, which is heal the boy and the man will show up. Now, the reason for linking those two is to say that actually a lot of our mental health issues and challenges, anxieties, are born out of things that we experienced earlier on in our lives. And our brain has got a great way of making them mean stuff that they're not. But of course, we carry that with us and they become our stresses and anxieties. So that's important to recognise that. And important to recognise that actually we can all go on a bit of a journey to heal that. And that's very unique for each individual. And when you do heal the boy, the man will show up. Now that then links to another phrase that we have banished from the Menable HQ right now, and that is the phrase toxic masculinity. We don't believe that's very helpful. It's not inclusive for a start because it has the inference that a lot of the responsibility for toxic behaviour that's going on in business or in the world is purely down to men. Now, I'm going to say an awful lot of it is, I have to say, disproportionately, but it's not just the responsibility of men. And if we want to get to a place of inclusivity and understanding each other, then what we've got to do is be mindful of those unhelpful phrases that we use. Because, of course, go back to the heal the boy, most men were brought up to grow a pair, man up, not shed a tear, not show your emotions, and therefore have become the man that they are, but actually in a lot of senses quite suppressed and quite held back by beliefs and values that, quite frankly, are probably out of date and not fit for purpose. So is it any wonder that some men find it difficult to navigate the world from the stress and anxiety point of view, and hence that we get the issue that we do at this time of year? So, hope all of that makes sense. So heal the boy and the man will show up. There's obviously lots of work to be done on that for some people, but also let's eradicate unhelpful phrases and statements because they're not good from a point of view of inclusivity. And quite frankly, the key to all of this is exactly as Shaking Stevens said. This is the season for love and understanding. But let's not just do that at Christmas. Take it easy. Have a good one. See you next time.
There is only Stephen that could get a Shaking Stevens line into one of his Menable moments, isn't there?
Yeah, I was impressed by that. I wondered where he was going.
Which Shakin' Stevens quote he was going
Yeah,
to?
well, I thought it was going to
Song.
burst into this old house where he's fixing the roof and the shutters and all that, which is sort of associated with men and
I suppose it
hammers.
could have gone either way. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So no, many thanks for that, Steve. A lot to digest, and as ever, we do urge you, if you'd like to get in touch with Steve, you can email him at stephen.witten@menable.org, and that's Stephen with a PH, or visit Menable online at menable.org.
Yeah, and I would urge you to check out what he's up to, particularly on LinkedIn, with some of the stuff he's involved with and people he's getting involved with as well, in terms of people within the sector and support that he's giving around the whole well-being and mental health. So he is very busy, and I'm sure that he'll only get more and better in 2023. So again, thank you, Steve, for all your support with this. So heading back to the headlines then, and Curtis sort of mentioned this right at the start in terms of that closed loop now, the closed circle. And Car Dealer have ran the story that Virtue Motors acquires lion's share of Helston garages. Now, we have talked about this last week, and we didn't know where we're up to with the remainder, but it's now been announced, hasn't it, Curtis?
It has, yeah, and it's actually a good headline because it does sum up the deal. And this deal, I mean, it's interesting, really, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
it's negotiations have been going on for 9 months. We've just discovered, and words did slip out a month or so ago, didn't
Yeah.
it? Yeah, we were aware of that, but this is final confirmation that Virtue Motors is acquiring 28 of Helston's dealerships, and this follows on from Yeomans, who last week we reported was acquiring 12 Volkswagen Group sites from Helston. And earlier this week, it was announced that Rybrook was taking Helston's Porsche business in Exeter. So this had been speculated for certainly the last 2 or 3 weeks, and this is final confirmation of how the deal is being concluded.
Yeah, and as you say there, we kind of muted. We wasn't sure what was going to happen with the Ferrari site because it hadn't been mentioned in any of the earlier news releases. But it is confirmed that actually both Volvo and Ferrari sites that were with Helston have gone to Virtue, and they're the first for Virtue in terms of adding to his Robert's sort of OEM portfolio. So it's a great acquisition that. And I mean that Ferrari business down in Cornwall is supposed to be a superb operation. So I think it's and he is quoted in saying that they're very delighted to obviously be welcoming both Volvo and Ferrari to the Virtue Motor Group business. So there's a little bit more detail on the actual finances of the acquisition that you can get at the London Stock Exchange, which does go into a little bit more detail. But the acquisition of Helston for an enterprise value of 120.1 million, and that represents a 6.8 times its EBITDA of the acquired dealerships. But it's because there's a few little bits around this in terms of some of the assets and things that have all come with it, and saying that the figures are 6.8 times the value, which is a phenomenal figure, but great business to be buying.
Yeah, definitely. So, as we say, it's 28 sales outlets. So it's actually worth just running through what that covers, because there's 4 Land Rover sites, 5 BMW sites, 1 BMW Motorrad site, which is particularly significant because, as we know, Virtue have been growing its BMW motorcycle business and is now the biggest partner with Motorrad in the UK. 5 Mini sites, 3 Jaguar, 5 Volvo sites, that Ferrari site you mentioned, and 4 Peugeot sites. So, and significantly, because Helston was a major player in the southwest, so this will take up Virtue's representation in the southwest to 32 sites. So it does actually make it a core region for the group.
Yeah, and I think we're waiting to see what that will do to their AM100 position as well, don't we? That's going to be the key with this because the Helston had a reasonably strong position in the AM100 as well.
Yeah, they were rated 28 in the most recent AM 100, and that was based on a turnover of £626 million. So that's going to give Virtue at least one extra place, one higher place. So I think we now see them in the top three.
Yeah, so we'll keep an eye on that one, and it does finish a few of his quotes saying that while there is uncertainty in the UK economy today, that they continue to invest for the long term and remain excited about the future for Virtue Motors. So it kind of shows this determination to keep growing. And we did have that interview with Robert where he talked about what it's not about where he wants to be. It's just taking those opportunities when they present themselves to him. So, a great one to finish on this year for 2023.
Yeah, definitely. And if you want more detail on the Rybrook acquisition of that Porsche site in Exeter, then urge you to have a look at AM, and we'll put that particular headline on the newsletters because it just gives a little more detail on that particular deal.
Yeah, definitely. So we've got the final story of this week is coming from the Financial Times, and this is now starting to see the return of Brexit in headlines now, Curtis.
Yeah, it never really went away,
It
did it?
didn't really, did it? It just got covered by something else. But car makers warn on EU tariffs threat to EV vehicle prices. Now, this is talking about the impending sort of deadline of the 2024, where the rules of origin start to take effect under the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, the TCA, which has obviously temporarily exempted EVs from the rules, stating that products must be sustainably made in the Britain or the bloc to qualify for the EU zero tariffs. Now, this kind of directs a little bit towards Asia, doesn't it? And the origin of the batteries for the electric vehicles coming out of Asia for the marketplace, and that they do take a significant proportion of the vehicle's value, and therefore risk that tariff of the rules of origin.
Yeah, it really is an interesting one, this, because within the story, it's calculated that the batteries make up 30 to 45% of the total price of an electric car. Now, we were talking before recording the show today that that's actually come down, hasn't it? That figure was significantly higher, but that's still
Yes.
a
Yeah.
huge, yeah, it's still a huge chunk, isn't it? And but through this temporary exemption, the tariff has not been imposed. But what we could see from January the 1st, 2024, is the implementation of tariffs, which could see a further 10% rise in a market that is struggling to assert itself and to grow, to attract new buyers, primarily because of that price of entry.
Yeah, and Mike Hawes, who's obviously the chief executive of the SMMT, he's reported to say that he is supporting an extension to the exemption past 2024 there, and that he doesn't think that battery manufacturing capability in either the UK or Europe will expand enough to meet demand. And that's where we are now, approaching that point in time where, as you covered right off at the start of the show, Curtis, that percentage share now of those alternative fuels, in particular the battery electric vehicles, now starting to dominate the new vehicle marketplace as we approach this point of change around this rules of origin, and not really manufacturing that many batteries in the UK or Europe to meet that kind of supply and requirement for that volume.
Yeah, and that's kind of the key to the story, really, because the rollout of these giga factories hasn't really happened yet. And there's an interesting piece in the FT that says that for more than a dozen battery factories are expected to open across Europe this decade to cater for this growing number of electric vehicles made in the region. But car makers say promises by the chemical and battery industry for a swift increase in production have not been met. And there's a great quote here from one person familiar with the talks, that's how they're quoted, who basically says, "We were sold a pup by the chemical industry." So there's lots of blames and sort of counter blaming going on here.
Yeah, so they say, there's it's a great insight there, and kind of says, I suppose really the last 2 or 3 years with the pandemic and what's been going on kind of gives enough justification for these kind of things to be extended, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because we've just lost that period of time where this growth and expansion and investment has just not been able to happen. Sorry, so I don't know. It's going to get interesting as we move towards that deadline there. So we'll see what happens. But as always, as I say there, all the stories from today, we'll put the hyperlinks, the headlines in the newsletter on Monday when that does get distributed. And as always, do check out the stories in full details. And we'll put the link to the London Stock Exchange on there as well. So if you did want to look at some of the financials and quotes and the size of the business and portfolio of the Vertu acquisition, we'll share the link to that one as well.
But that's all for now. You've been listening to the weekly Motor Trade Radio podcast powered by eBay Motors Group. Many thanks for joining us for all the chatter that matters. We're back with the headlines next weekend. Until then, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.